Today I'm going to show you how I made this drawing. I'll talk about my process, the real little tricks I've picked up over the years, and hopefully you'll find something useful for your own art. I think it's worth telling you about my materials. I don't have a fancy iPod or anything like that, although I'd love one someday. But I draw on my old Samsung tablet with the best pen it came with. After years of use, it's definitely gotten slower, and in IBIS Paint there's a noticeable pen delay, but the funny thing is, after about 15 minutes, your brain just kind of accepts the lag and moves on. And one of the pluses is that there's a button on the pen that you can set some function in the drawing program itself. I have a switch from an eraser to a brush. I draw more often on IBIS Paint text, but sometimes I reach for Infinite Painter. I don't really use fancy brushes. Most of the time it's just a basic round brush with pressure sensitivity and the lasso tool. Sometimes I add soft airbrush for gradients. I get my inspiration from Pinterest. Like many artists, I spent way too much time on Pinterest, but eventually I found this reference and I immediately loved the soft and cozy atmosphere, so I wanted to convey this atmosphere. And here are some photos for your artistic practices. The truth is that I don't sketch. Okay, just kidding, but I really don't draw sketches, because every time I try to start with a traditional sketch, it ends at that stage. I can't even describe how many of my sketches were left unfinished, so I have to find a way around it. I started using what I call a silhouette method. Most of my recent works, which I did finish, I start by finding the basic shapes, which I then detail. So here too, I just draw a silhouette, which then turns into a girl. First, I use a round brush to outline the silhouette, and then I detail it with the lasso. From this point on, and almost until the very end, I will only use the lasso. The sketch stage is the fastest for me because I don't like it, so I found a method for myself to immediately move on from sketch to some detailing. Everyone will have their own color solutions. Some people like bright neon colors, while others like dark and muted ones. I like something in between. I can't say that I like to use any specific color combinations, but what I can say for sure is that I like to use as few colors as possible. Looking back, I think it started around 2017 when there was this challenge where people drew using only 3 markers. I guess that's where my obsession with limited palettes came from. For this work, I use a combination of ochre, dark red, and green colors. And for future highlights, I will use light yellow. But this is not the only combination of colors that I use in my works, although it's often found. Yeah, it seems like it's the only one, but you can experiment with colors because this is exactly what will catch the eye of people who will see your drawing for the first time. But this doesn't mean that the work will not look good in black and white format, because at the end of the day there aren't any rules. If you think neon green hair looks good, then neon green hair it is. Of course, we should talk about the actual drawing technique.
I absolutely love the look of lasso art. There's something about those sharp edges that just scratches my brain the right way.
Sometimes I look at my finished drawings and think like, wow, maybe I can actually draw. That's also why I don't really use blur. There are exceptions, but we don't talk about those. My process is actually pretty simple. First, I block out the main shapes with the lasso tool, then I use it again to add the shadows, keeping them nice and simple. For smaller details, I just lower the opacity and repeat the exact same process. As for blur and airbrushes, they're just not for me. I didn't even know that airbrush tool existed until I've been using IBIS Paint for almost 2 years. And when I finally found it, I tried it once and I wasn't impressed and it's just not my cup of tea. But when I discovered the lasso art for the first time, I just knew that But remember, what is right for me might be not right for you, and the opposite way, so do what you want to do. Also, I forgot to mention that I use Liquify tool a lot, and this is my go-to tool after lasso, so yeah. I have no idea what I'm trying to do here, like, just fill in the face. Oh my god, I did the circle. What a face. I also draw it with lasso. Nothing new. Now let's talk about my favorite part, shadows. I have a very scientific approach to rendering. The more shadows, the better. Is it a good advice?
Well, I don't know.
Am I going to follow it anyway? Absolutely. So all my drawings look contrasting and delicious thanks to this. The secret is very simple. The shadows should be in their place, dark and contrasting, because they are shadows. Believe it or not, I used to be terrified of shadows. Every drawing looked flat because I was scared of making them too dark. So I'd spent hours rendering, and in the end, the only difference was one tiny transparent line somewhere near the line art. Those were really difficult times, but still I got out of this crisis, and I advise you to do the same. Actually, it's quite a common problem. I think a lot of beginner artists are afraid of shadows because they're afraid of ruining the drawing. But here's a funny thing. If the shadow looks terrible, you can just undo it. How I love being a digital artist. Specifically in this work, I just reduced opacity and took the color that I already put as a base. It turned out pretty good, and I was happy with it. Sometimes that's enough. You don't always need 20 different shades to make something look interesting. I also like to take either dark purple for shadows or dark red, depending on the lighting and colors. Pure black shadows can work, but often it just makes your character look sick, and not in the good way. Half the time I don't actually know what I'm doing, I just keep changing colors until my brain gets bored. I also try to decide where the light source is before I start rendering, not because I'm good at lighting, but because future me will get confused otherwise. So on this drawing, light comes from here. It's simple for me because I have a reference photo basically, but you still have to know where your light is coming from. I think one of the biggest things that improved my art was simply being brave enough to make my shadows darker. The drawing might look ugly for a while. Just trust the process. You'll get it when you'll get it. And also, don't be afraid to make mistakes, because you can simply undo it and just make it another way. So, yeah, I made hair, like, very bad, and then I undo it and made it another way, and it turned out pretty good, so you can do the same. And look how the one highlight can extremely change the face. Cool, yeah? When all the shadows were drawn, I looked at this work and thought that I was really missing something. And I wasn't planning to spend another hour fixing it, so I needed a quick solution right here and right now. Like, the colors looked fine, the lighting was there, but everything felt a little too sharp. Maybe I was overdoing with lasso? No. I guess the transition between the colors looked a bit awkward, and now a reasonable person would probably use blur, but I hate it, so I decided to add dots to all the places where the colors meet. Just randomly, without any pattern, I drew a bunch of dots, and in this way, without using the hated blur, I was able to blend everything. I think little details like this make a drawing much more interesting to look at. Even if people don't immediately notice them, they help break up large flat areas and add a bit of texture. At this point, avoiding the blur tool has become a personal challenge. Maybe one day I'll make peace with it, but today is definitely not the day. If you're epileptic, you've probably been laying on the floor for a long time because of how much I flip the canvas, but it really helps to spot all the mistakes, so use the flip. Then I saw that a banana has more life than my character, so I added a little bit of blush to her face to give her life, you know. At this point, the character is basically finished, but she's just floating. And here's a little rule I like to follow. If your character is lying down, they should probably be lying on something. Otherwise, they're just casually levitating, and that's a completely different story. So I added a simple light green table underneath her. Nothing complicated, it's just literally some shapes, but suddenly the drawing has a sense of space. For the background itself, I chose dark blue color. I thought it worked nicely with the rest of the palette, and more importantly, it made the lighter parts of the drawing stand out even more. I also added a soft light to the background behind the character. It's a tiny detail, but it helps separate her from the background and pushes her forward. And now, I have a confession to make. Remember how I spent this entire video talking about how much I dislike blur and airbrushes? Well, at the very end I always use a little bit of airbrush. I know it's... but hear me out. I add a soft gradient over the whole drawing, warm yellow where the light hits, and a soft purple in the shadows. It ties all the colors together and makes the lightning feel much more alive. Look at this, it almost feels like the light is actually glowing. And finally, the most important step, the signature. I always sign my works, partly because it's nice to know who made it, partly because it makes the drawing feel complete, and partly because signing your artworks make you feel like a famous artist who just finished giving out autographs. Honestly, I highly recommend it, even if nobody asked for your autograph yet. And that's it. Our drawing is finally finished. So what have we learned today? First of all, you don't need expensive equipment. An old tablet with a slide and energetic erasers would work just fine. Second, sketching is optional, kind of. Third, the lasso tool can solve approximately 97% of your artistic problems. The other 3% can usually be fixed by adding more shadows. If that doesn't work, add dots. If that still doesn't work, pretend it's your artistic style. Somehow, despite all of this, we ended up with a finished drawing that I'm actually really happy with. I hope this video showed you that art doesn't have to be complicated. Half the time I'm just making things up and hoping they'll work, and surprisingly they usually do. Thank you so much for drawing with me today. I hope you enjoyed watching my slightly chaotic process and maybe even picked up a trick or two along the way. And if nothing else, at least now you know that it's completely acceptable to spend an entire video saying you hate the airbrush and then use it anyway. See you in the next one. Bye!